Are you sitting comfortably? Then it's time to soar. This is the Riff Chord.
Morning, everyone. We are all stuck in our homes in coronavirus crisis. I hope everyone listening is safe and you're keeping your family safe, and we're all in this together. This is a unique experience for all of us, but it does give us opportunity to have interesting discussions. My guest this morning is many things. He's a historian, he's a guitar player, he's a dad, university lecturer, and he teaches on the philosophy of sport and has written widely on one of Canada's prized possessions, the Stanley Cup, and how it relates to Canadian history. It's Dr. Jordan Goldstein. Good morning, Jordan.
Good morning, Paul. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and your audience today.
Oh, it's great to have you. It's great to have you.
The first thing that pops into my mind is that we've learned how easy it is for people to fall into directive, to fall into line. That old adage that fear essentially will condition you to act in ways you may not have, I think is becoming increasingly transparent. And I don't think that the fear is unfounded. I think the fear is real in terms of public health and the way that this virus spreads. But what I'm concerned about, and I'm not a health professional, so for me to sort of dabble in that world, I don't think it is the most responsible. But what I do know, what I have studied, and what I have a little bit of knowledge is history. And you can see the machinations of sort of authoritarian control. Not saying that we've slid into that, but I think what this crisis has revealed is how easy it is for stable, democratic, representative democracies to slide into authoritarianism based on fear. And when people are scared, they will hand away their liberties. They will hand away anything, so it seems, in order to grasp onto any sense of control or any sense of security or safety. And to me, this has really been exposed in terms of the way people have reacted to the crisis, but also the ways in which governments oftentimes exploit crises. And you're starting to see, I think, a lot of people, whether it's right or it's wrong, and I'm not sure, we're going to know until much later on in terms of when we get the numbers, in terms of deaths and in terms of cases and in terms of people that have been healed. But I think people are now a little bit starting to realize that the virus is not the only thing that we have to be worried about right now. I think people are rightly worried about, especially in places where we've had massive shutdowns, the economic ruin that's maybe in the cards. And as someone who wasn't necessarily gung-ho on our economy, I didn't think we were in a very structurally sound place before this crisis. Mm-hmm. To me, the economic issue is something that I've been monitoring for a while. So that's not a big surprise, but the big surprise to me is the quickness and the swiftness of potential government overreach in an emergency situation, and the ease with which the populations of these democratic and representative countries have seemingly gone along with it. And that's the one thing that's keeping me up, because if I start to get into sort of the health, the public health, the statistical modeling, those sorts of things, I'm out of my depth. And I think the one thing, and I think this maybe relates to the point of what's animating what's animating people to maybe trade in their freedoms for some security is people just want a sense of control, right? This is a chaotic time.
Mhm.
People's lives are being upended, and any sense that you can control your own life, or that as a society we can get a handle on this virus or control it, people in a moment of fear or panic will rush to any answer that gives them that control. And I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist as well, but I think that's the dynamic you see playing out, and that's what's sort of moving my interest in that area as opposed to other areas. And it also, I think, speaks to the need for people to focus on different things. You know, if everybody focuses just on public health, well, then we lose out on voices talking about the economy, or voices talking about the loss and erosion of civil liberties. And so all of these voices, I believe, are very necessary. And so that's the thing. Those are the things that I've been thinking about, because it gives me a sense of control over how to react to what's basically daily changes.
Right. That's fascinating. I've seen your social media comments. I didn't fully appreciate your full perspective on this. That's interesting. You know, it just reminds me, I started my career, I had a criminology degree, and then they hired me in the federal government to work on a project where, as electronic commerce and all these digital communications were proliferating more and more, what is it going to mean for surveillance? What is it going to mean for law enforcement, CSIS, those types of things? How is the law going to provide them with access that they need? And the mentor that I ended up working with, he was very much into this. Like, you know, the citizenry has to decide where we come down on this. Like, do you want to willingly give over to the authorities your right to privacy, or are you going to buy their argument that they need that level of control in order to keep the country rolling? And I left that job in 2000. He kept it, but he told me that when 9/11 happened, that's when the forces of control really flowed through the department. And it was, no, the citizenry is now, in our view, is now willing to give over its civil liberties and go more on the control side and give the government that level of access that they say they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem with speaking up in a time like this is you can very easily be shut down as somebody who doesn't care about saving people's lives, or who doesn't care about the public health crisis, or why are you worrying about something like that when we need everything? We need everything focused on preventing the spread, or securing supplies, or whatever the directive is.
Mhm.
And that becomes very dangerous, and that sort of plays into that mentality of people who are scared will just gladly give away freedoms and liberties. And these liberties and freedoms, it's not as if you give them away and you can get them back. You give the great example of what happened after September 11th in 2001. I mean, the Patriot Act was passed swiftly and in basically unanimous support, although there were some dissenters, and these dissenters were called traitors or sometimes even worse. And you're seeing that today. A good example in the United States would be Representative Thomas Massey, who wanted to have a vote on the massive stimulus bill, and he was absolutely harangued by everybody from all sides for simply just wanting members of Congress to have a recorded vote on a massive stimulus bill, one that I believe enriches banks and corporations far more than it ever will the ordinary citizen. And in fact, it indebts the ordinary citizen far more than the one-time payments and emergency relief that they're going to receive in that bill. And history tends to look good on people like Thomas Massey, and it tends to look bad on the people who shout him down. And I think that you're seeing that kind of pressure. Certainly from society, in order to everybody pull on the same page, everybody get together, which I think we do need. I do think we need to unite, but in uniting, we don't just give away our freedoms and our liberties, because we're not going to get them back. If you look at the Patriot Act and the way that it eviscerated the Fourth Amendment, for example, in the United States, it's, we're coming up to 20 years later, and the Patriot Act gets passed every single, reauthorized every single year, and the powers, rather than being clawed back, are actually expanded
Sure.
even further. So it's not as if you can temporarily give up these freedoms or liberties. And I think in the spirit of coming together, somebody like me who's very interested and worried about the preservation of civil liberties would be okay to temporarily suspend them, so long as this was explicitly written, that all types of emergency legislations come with sunset clauses,
Mhm.
that they automatically must be repealed, or sorry, not they automatically must be renewed at a certain time when the situation is.
Right.
Because we are in a dynamic and ever-changing situation. So I do understand the need to suspend things at this time, if necessary. And I don't know exactly what that is. And I'm also sure that the people in charge don't quite know exactly what that is. And so if we are going to embark on programs or social policies that severely curtail and might even destroy elements of our civil liberties,
Mhm.
these must be temporary, and it must be explicit, and we're just not getting those kinds of assurances from our leaders, that these will be temporary, that any excessive power grab is going to be limited. We saw that in Canada when the Liberals attempted to essentially get rid of parliamentary oversight for spending and taxing, and the Minister of Finance be the sole authority for an 18-month period when it comes to spending and taxing. Now, the opposition parties, I think, fought back well, but I would suggest not well enough, because, and I could be mistaken on this, I think they granted 6 months of emergency, 6 months instead of 18 months. So basically, we now have a precedent where if the government declares, an emergency, the finance minister can shelve parliament.
Right.
And this is extraordinary because even in wartime, this is not something that's been done.
Right.
And you're talking about not just in Canada, but in the United Kingdom, where our parliamentary system comes from. So these are unprecedented and really dangerous overreaches. And while I commend the opposition parties for clawing that back, I don't know if they went far enough, and I don't know if they've prevented future abuses of power. Because for all we know, those parties envision themselves in power at a time of emergency and a time of crisis, and wouldn't they all like that power at that time? And so there is a bit of gamesmanship at play, I believe. And I think that's also something that's very disheartening, and we need to be very careful about letting government officials take these extraordinary powers, because while they do say that they have our best interests in mind, public choice theory, which is a very respected branch of economics, its progenitor, James Buchanan, won a Nobel Prize. And basically his public choice theory just says that government officials act just like everybody else. We all have our own incentives. We all act in our own self-interest. And just because somebody is put in a public position does not mean they automatically defer to the public. They, more times than not, just act the way we all do, which is in our self-interest. And this is another reason why we have to carefully guard these. Our politicians may say something in public, and I'm not suggesting anybody has actually done this, nor do I have direct evidence. Although in Canada, when our chief, when the top medical official in our country says that individuals shouldn't wear masks, and the reason why they say this is not to protect public health, but to protect the public supply of PPEs, or personal protective equipment, essentially to prevent the exposure of the amount of rationing that goes on in our socialized universal insurance healthcare coverage. I think that does a great disservice to the ability of the public to trust our officials, and it shows you that what the public does not always align with their motivations. If their goal is to protect public health, they could have easily said a message like, wearing a mask can be effective for individuals, but at this time, because we are low on supplies, we would ask the public not to overreact. And if you don't need masks, don't buy them, or something like that. Which, just as I'm saying it, I understand from a messaging perspective how terrible the message that is. But that's the truth of the matter, and so they've concealed the truth. And you're seeing just on this one issue of masks alone, that the government will indeed tell the public one thing when their motivations are actually something different, and they're actually not even telling us the truth. So that's the one example that just pops right off my head, and again, sort of, I think, substantiates what the public choice theory has to inform us about the way in which government officials and bureaucrats make their decisions. Mm-hmm. We want to believe that these are people who act upon, the better angels of our nature, and when they go into public service, they shed their personal ambitions and their personal ideals, and this is just not realistic. I mean, all humans are fallible. All humans act selfishly, and we should expect nothing different from those who are in charge of us in these situations. So for a whole range of reasons, that's what I've been focusing on, because there's enough people out there talking about the public health issues or the economics of the situation, which I am also very interested in. But I think something that is more apparent, that could take effect in more countries, would be the loss of civil liberties, as opposed to economics, which will differ country to country, I think.
The Riff Chord Podcast.